The heat hung heavy over Coyote Ridge like a fevered blanket, waves of it rising off the cracked earth as if the land itself were restless. The town sat quiet beneath the noonday sun, shutters drawn against the glare, the air thick with dust and silence. Only the steady clink of spurs and the low creak of worn leather stirred the stillness, announcing the return of a man most thought long gone or long dead. Silas Creed walked into town with the gait of someone not looking for trouble but more than ready to meet it. His coat, faded and fraying at the cuffs, flapped slightly in the wind. A jagged scar split the right side of his face, just under the eye, a line that looked more like it belonged to a man carved out of myth than flesh. He wasn't armed, not visibly, but that didn't mean he was unarmed. He paused outside the saloon, gazing up at the chipped sign swinging lazily on its hinges. It hadn't changed. That was the problem. Towns like Coyote Ridge didn't forget, they just got quiet about it. Silas had been gone 6 months, riding high ridges and sleeping under dead stars, trying to outpace a past that clung like burrs in a horse's tail. Just as he reached for the door, it happened. A shrill voice, half hope and half sob, sliced the air. "Papa." Silas turned instinctively, hand falling to his side where a revolver used to sit. The girl ran straight at him, barefoot, maybe 8 or 9, her dusty brown hair flying behind her like wildfire smoke. Her arms flung around his waist with reckless desperation. She held on tight, trembling, her face buried in his worn duster. "I found you," she said. "I found you, Papa." He froze. Words caught in his throat like gravel. She smelled of dust, old hay, and something faintly sweet, maybe peaches. Her dress was threadbare, one sleeve torn, and her cheeks streaked with grime. She clutched a ragged cloth doll in one hand, its button eyes half sewn, half lost. Silas pried her off gently, kneeling to her level. Her eyes were wide, watery, and completely certain. "I ain't your papa," he said, voice low, rough as dry creek bed. She blinked, confused, then stepped back. "But Mama said you would be here. She said you're Silas Creed." A silence thicker than gunpowder settled between them. From across the street, a pair of townsfolk peeked out from behind curtains. Whispers began to buzz like flies. "You know my name?" he asked, staring hard, trying to find the angle, the setup, the trap. She nodded, tightening her grip on the doll. "I walked a long way. From Red Rock. By yourself." She hesitated, lips trembling, then gave the smallest nod. "Mama said, if something happened I should find you. She said you'd keep me safe." Silas stood, towering over the child now, hands flexing like they itched to reach for something he didn't carry anymore. Red Rock was 3 towns over and known more for graves than grace. If this girl had come from there alone, she was either lying or braver than anyone had a right to be. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maggie," she said. "Maggie Thorne." The name meant nothing, but the weight in her voice did. "I don't know your mama." "I sure as hell ain't your father," he said, not unkindly but firm. "You got anyone else?" She stared at the ground. A gust kicked up dust around them. Silas turned, his instincts screaming that they were being watched. Sure enough, Sheriff Wade Harlan stood on the boardwalk, hand resting on the butt of his revolver, squinting at them from beneath his hat. Silas tipped his chin. Harlan nodded back, then walked over slowly, boots echoing in the hush that had fallen over the street. "She with you?" Harlan asked, his voice the drawl of a man who liked answers tidy and fast. Silas shook his head. "Says her name's Maggie Thorne. Says she came from Red Rock. Alone." Harlan's eyes narrowed at the girl. "That right, Missy?" Maggie clutched Silas's leg again. "I ain't lying, Dot." The sheriff studied her, then Silas. "Well, we can sort it out at my office. Let's not do this out here in the dirt." Silas didn't move for a long beat, then nodded and lifted the girl gently. She didn't resist. She leaned against his shoulder like she'd been there 100 times before. In the sheriff's office, Maggie sat on a bench while Silas and Harlan stood by the desk. The place smelled of tobacco and old pine oil. Dust motes spun in the golden light slanting through the window. Harlan took off his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. "She showed up this morning?" "Just now. Ran right into me." "You sure you don't know her?" Silas gave him a look. "Would I be asking if I did?" "Fair," Harlan said, then glanced over at the girl. "How'd she know your name?" Silas didn't answer. "She's got a photo," Maggie piped up. "Mama gave it to me." She pulled a small square from her pocket, frayed and creased. Silas took it, eyes narrowing. It was old, sepia-toned, faded. A younger version of him, clean-shaven, coat buttoned, baby in his arms. His breath caught. He didn't remember the photo being taken. But that was him. No mistaking it. The scar hadn't happened yet. He looked different. Open. Oh. He stared harder at the baby in the image. Maybe 6 months old. Wrapped in a striped blanket. That's you? He asked quietly. Maggie nodded. Mama said it was taken right before you had to leave. I've never seen this before, Silas muttered, handing it back like it burned. Harlan leaned against the desk. You ever know a woman named Thorne? Maybe, Silas said, voice thin. It's a long road behind me. Harlan gave him a long look. And some of it's catching up. Maggie yawned, eyelids drooping. She curled up on the bench, holding her doll close. Silas watched her for a long moment. His gut twisted. He'd buried comrades. Shot men in the back. Stared down death more times than he could count. But this tiny thing who believed in a version of him that had never existed, she rattled him worse than all of it. She got anywhere else to go? He asked finally. Harlan shook his head. Far as I know, her mama passed. No kin listed. No papers, no direction. Just your name and that photo. Silas sat down, elbows on his knees. What if this ain't coincidence? You think someone's using her to get to you? Maybe. Maybe not. But I got too many ghosts to assume kindness. They sat in silence a moment. Outside the wind picked up again. I'll keep her at my place tonight, Silas said. She shouldn't sleep in a cell. Harlan nodded. You sure? No. But I'll do it anyway. They left just as the sun dipped behind the far ridge. Maggie stirred in his arms, whispering, Told you I'd find you. Silas looked down at her. The weight of her head on his shoulder didn't feel wrong. It felt like a debt. He walked her out toward the edge of town, to a shack that barely passed for a home. Inside, he lit the lantern, poured water, and watched as she explored the room with cautious eyes. She set the doll on the bed and turned to him. Do you still tell stories? She asked, almost shyly. He blinked. What kind? The ones with horses and skies and thunder. Mama said you were the best at it. His throat tightened. Not for a long time. You could try, she said, already crawling under the thin blanket. Silas stood there, unmoving as the lantern flickered. A distant coyote howled. He sat beside her, fingers folded. Once, he began slowly, there was a man who tried to ride ahead of his shadow. But the faster he rode, the longer it got. She smiled as her eyes closed. Hours later, Silas stood outside under the stars. The sky was vast, sharp with constellations. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. From the tree line someone watched him. A figure stepped back into the dark, silent as smoke. Then vanished. Silas turned, suddenly alert, but the woods were quiet. Still, something had changed. And somewhere deep inside, a voice he hadn't heard in years stirred and whispered. It started again. The morning came with a sky of pale gold, and Coyote Ridge stirred beneath it like a town unsure whether to rise or stay sleeping. Roosters crowed, dogs barked, and the forge 2 blocks from Silas's shack rang out with the sharp clang of iron to anvil. Silas stood at the stove, frying the last of the eggs he had. Maggie sat at the tiny table with her legs swinging off the chair, eyes fixed on the flame under the pan as if it were some kind of magic. You always live like this? She asked, wrinkling her nose. Silas didn't answer right away. The shack was little more than one room with a corner for cooking and another for sleeping. A saddle sat in the corner. 2 pairs of boots, his and a worn-out child's pair he found tucked in the trunk this morning, stood beside the door like old friends waiting for a trail that never came. Don't need much, he said finally. Haven't stayed one place long enough to gather clutter. Clutter's not so bad, she said, peering around. Makes a place feel like it remembers you. He slid the eggs onto a dented tin plate and set it in front of her. She attacked it with the energy of someone who'd gone too long on hope and dust. Silas poured himself coffee and stood by the window, watching the tree lean beyond the ridge. She looked up between bites. You watched over me while I slept. You didn't move. You don't know that. Could hear your boots. You walk heavy. Silas almost smiled. Almost. Maggie took a sip from the tin cup, wincing. Tastes like burnt mud. It's coffee. It's awful. That's how you know it's working. She giggled, a short, surprised sound that felt like sunlight slipping through a crack in an old barn. Silas leaned against the windowsill, cup in hand, but his mind was already galloping miles ahead. Someone had followed them last night. He was sure of it. Whoever it was, they were careful, but not enough. Years on the trail had sharpened his instincts like a hawk's beak. Did your mama say anything else? About me? He asked without turning. Maggie's fork paused. Only that you were brave. That you'd done bad things for good reasons. That you loved horses more than people. He didn't answer. She said she met you in a place called Bitter Hollow. He stiffened. Bitter Hollow was a scar in his memory, a stretch of land where promises were buried deeper than the dead. She ever tell you her first name? He asked, voice low. She said names didn't matter as much as what people remember about you. That sounded right. That sounded like the kind of woman who would leave a child with nothing but a photo and a name, trusting fate to make good on old debts. They ate in silence after that. By midday, Silas walked Maggie into town. He held her hand loosely, more so she wouldn't wander off than anything else. She skipped a little to match his longer strides, humming under her breath, doll tucked in her other arm. They stopped at the general store. Inside, the air smelled of tobacco, peppermints, and old cedar. Silas Creed, the storekeep said, wiping his hands on a rag. Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Didn't expect to be back, Silas replied. The storekeep's eyes drifted to Maggie. That you're? No. The man raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Maggie wandered over to a shelf of licorice and pickled eggs. Can we get these? She asked, holding up a glass jar. Silas shook his head. We're here for boots and a coat. You'll freeze come nightfall if you're not dressed right. She sighed but obeyed. The storekeep disappeared into the back, returning with a small brown coat patched at the sleeves and boots just shy of new. Maggie pulled them on, beaming. Outside, Silas caught sight of a tall rider tethering his horse near the saloon. The man was lean, dressed in black, and carried himself with a quiet menace. Silas didn't recognize him, but the air tightened all the same. He put a hand gently on Maggie's shoulder. Time to go. But we just got here. I said now. She frowned but followed, glancing back at the man. They made it halfway down the street when the voice called out. Creed. Silas turned slow. The man in black stood in the center of the road, hands hanging loose at his sides. His voice was smooth, calm, dangerous. You left something behind in Bitter Hollow, the man said. Silas stepped between him and Maggie. I leave a lot behind. You left a deal unfinished. I left that deal because the price changed. The man smiled thinly. Price always changes. You know that. Maggie tugged Silas's sleeve. Who is he? Someone I hoped was dead. You coming with me, Creed? The man asked, hand drifting near his belt. Not today. Then I'll come back tomorrow. And the day after that. You'll run out of town before you run out of past. Silas said nothing. The man tipped his hat and walked off like it had all been casual. But Silas knew better. Warnings like that didn't echo, they exploded. They returned to the shack just as the clouds rolled in. Rain started, soft and slow. Silas lit the fire, wrapped Maggie in a blanket, and paced the floor like a caged wolf. You gonna tell me what that was? Maggie asked. He knelt down, looked her square in the eyes. That man, he's part of a piece of my life I buried. The kind that digs itself up when it smells weakness. She didn't flinch. You scared of him? He smiled without humor. Everyone's scared of something. What are you scared of? Silas hesitated. Hurting people who don't deserve it. Maggie studied him like she was seeing more than just his face. You haven't hurt me. Yet. She leaned forward and touched his scar. Mama said that kind of mark never leaves the heart. Only the face. He closed his eyes briefly. Your mama say a lot of things. She had to. We didn't have much else. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Silas stood, checked the windows and loaded the rifle hanging by the door. We're leaving at first light, he said. Where? Somewhere they won't find us easy. Maggie curled into the blanket. You mean somewhere the past can't reach? Silas didn't respond. Outside, the rain thickened into a steady curtain. Later that night, as Maggie slept, Silas stepped outside. Rain soaked him within seconds, but he didn't care. He stood in it, eyes scanning the woods, breath fogging in the chill. The man in black would return. And next time he'd bring others. Silas had walked away from blood once. He wasn't sure he could do it again. But this girl, this Maggie Thorne with eyes like judgment and hope, she was something else. She made the silence in his chest ache. He looked back at the shack. A soft yellow glow bled through the curtain. Maybe this wasn't about repaying an old debt. Maybe this was a new one forming. And it terrified him more than bullets ever had. Dawn broke like a secret whispered through the trees, soft, fragile, and quick to vanish. Silas packed quietly, rolling up a bedroll with the same practiced precision he once used to reload pistols in the dark. Maggie stirred beneath the blanket but didn't open her eyes, as if trying to delay the inevitable just a little longer. He didn't wake her right away. There was something in watching her sleep that unsettled him, How deeply she trusted the safety of this place, of him. She slept with her arms around that ragged cloth doll, the one with the crooked smile and one remaining button eye. In another life, maybe he'd have carved her a wooden horse. In this one he just made sure the rifle was loaded and the saddlebag had enough jerky to get them through 2 days. When he finally nudged her shoulder, she blinked up at him like she already knew. "We leavin'?" she asked, voice scratchy from sleep. He nodded. "Sooner we ride, the more ground we cover." Maggie sat up, pulling on the small brown coat he'd bought her. "Is he coming back?" Silas didn't need to ask who she meant. He looked out the window. The sky was cloudless, the kind of blue that always came before trouble. "Yes," he said. "And next time he won't be alone." They rode out before the sun cleared the ridge. Silas had a roan mare named Bessie, solid as stone and twice as stubborn. He let Maggie ride in front, wrapped in a blanket, the doll wedged between them. Her small hands clung to the saddle horn like it was a lifeline. The trail west led through dry hills, pines whispering overhead, and the air grew cooler with every mile they put behind them. They didn't speak much. Silas was never one for idle talk, and Maggie, for all her energy, seemed to understand that silence was a kind of language too. By mid-morning they passed a ridge where the earth split open like an old scar. Silas dismounted and led the mare down a narrow path, boots crunching gravel. "Where are we going?" Maggie finally asked. "There's a place near Juniper Falls," he replied. "Old friend has a cabin. Off-grid. Quiet. You trust him?" Silas gave a half-shrug. "I trust that he wants to be left alone even more than I do. That's usually enough." They stopped at a creek for water. Maggie crouched, scooping handfuls of it to her face while Silas kept his eyes on the treeline. He'd lived too long to believe the past stayed buried just because you moved fast. "You ever been a father?" Maggie asked suddenly. The question hit harder than he expected. "No," he said after a pause. "Not the kind that stuck around anyhow. But you held a baby once. That picture, Mama said it wasn't a lie." He didn't look at her. There was a woman. Brief. Sweet. She smiled like the world didn't have knives in it. She said we'd make a new start. She had the baby. I left. Why? Because I wasn't that man. She wanted hope. I was carrying a bullet in my heart I hadn't earned the right to shoot. Maggie nodded like she understood. Maybe she did more than he realized. By dusk, they reached the outskirts of Juniper Falls. The town was no bigger than a whisper, just a few scattered homes, a church leaning sideways, and a windmill creaking like it mourned something long gone. Silas didn't stop. They pushed on another 5 miles to where the land sloped into a hidden valley, thick with trees and forgotten trails. The cabin was there just where he remembered it, half covered in ivy and as stubborn as its owner. He dismounted, lifted Maggie down, and knocked. The door opened a moment later, and a shotgun barrel greeted him. Then came the voice. Gruff. Sleep rough. Familiar. "Tell me why I shouldn't put a hole in you the size of a peach pit." Silas didn't flinch. "Because it's me, Jonah. And I brought whiskey." Pause. Then the shotgun lowered and the door creaked open fully. Jonah Langley looked like a man carved out of bark, gray-bearded, sharp-eyed, with one ear bent oddly like it had once lost a fight and never healed right. He saw Maggie, raised a brow and stepped aside. "I ain't got room for surprises, Silas." "She's not a surprise. She's a problem." Jonah barked a laugh. "Same thing." They sat at the kitchen table while Maggie explored the cabin, touching old trinkets and staring at shelves lined with tins and faded maps. The stove hissed, throwing heat across the wood floor. Silas poured the whiskey and explained everything, from the girl's sudden arrival to the man in black, to Bitter Hollow, and the name that came with no warning. Jonah listened in silence, nursing the drink. When Silas finished, the older man leaned back in his chair. "Well," Jonah muttered, "you're in it now. I didn't choose this." "No, but you didn't run. That's something." "She's just a kid." "She's a mirror," Jonah said. "And mirrors don't lie. You see her, and you see the man you could have been. That terrifies you more than that outlaw ever could." Silas didn't respond. "I've seen the kind of men who chase ghosts. They're relentless because they got nothing left to lose. You though? You just gained something. She's not mine. Don't matter. She thinks you are. That gives you more power than bullets." That night, Silas stood on the porch, watching the wind move through the trees. Jonah had gone to bed, and Maggie lay asleep in a cot near the fire, wrapped in blankets too big for her. He lit a smoke, trying to quiet the unrest inside him. Then came a rustle in the dark. His hand went to the revolver at his hip. A figure stepped into view, young, lean, and carrying a piece of paper. Not the man in black. A boy, maybe 16. Silas Creed? The boy asked. Silas nodded slowly. This is for you. The paper was sealed with red wax, already cracked from travel. Silas opened it, eyes scanning quickly. One sentence. Asterisk, the Hollow remembers. Asterisk. He folded the paper, tossed it into the fire barrel nearby, and watched it burn. Another rider was coming. More would follow. He looked back through the window at Maggie. She shifted in her sleep, murmuring something he couldn't hear. This wasn't just about him anymore. He had started a war the moment he didn't walk away. And now the clock was ticking. The sky over Juniper Falls turned the color of dried blood as evening closed in, and the forest fell into a breathless hush. The wind didn't move. Even the birds held their songs as if waiting. Silas stood beneath the lean-to at the side of the cabin, oiling his rifle with the same care one might give a sacred relic. His fingers worked in rhythm, slow and sure. The message from Bitter Hollow still echoed in his head, 7 words scratching like nails against old wood. The Hollow remembers. Jonah emerged from the trees with 2 rabbits tied over his shoulder and the smell of pine clinging to his coat. We've got maybe 2 days, Silas said without looking up. Jonah nodded. Longer if they come slow, shorter if they ride like hell's behind them. They'll ride fast. That man in black, he's not the kind who leaves breathing room. Jonah hung the rabbits on a hook near the smokehouse and stretched his shoulders with a grunt. You ever find out the girl's story? Real story, I mean? Silas hesitated. Bits and pieces. Her mama knew me once. Never said how, only that she trusted me to keep her safe. Seems like a hell of a gamble. She didn't have many chips left to play. Inside the cabin, Maggie sat cross-legged on the floor, stitching a tear in her doll's dress with needle and thread she found in Jonah's sewing tin. She worked in silence, tongue pressed to her lip in concentration. When she finished, she held the doll up like a doctor assessing a patient. I think she'll be okay, she whispered, brushing the doll's yarn hair aside. Then she looked up and saw Silas watching her from the doorway. You think we'll be okay? She asked, not quite playfully. Silas stepped in and crouched beside her. We've got good odds. Maggie raised an eyebrow, skeptical. You don't sound sure. I'm never sure. But I'm still standing. She nodded, then asked something she hadn't dared until now. Will they hurt you? Silas didn't lie. They'll try. Her face went still, doll clutched tighter. You ever been shot? Twice. Did it hurt? Like how? You scared of dying? He considered that, then said, used to be. Then I realized it's not dying that scares me. It's leaving something unfinished. She looked down at her doll, quiet again. Mama used to say the same thing. Silas stood. Get some rest. Tomorrow we prep. Next day might be loud. Outside, Jonah was sharpening a hatchet, stone sliding over steel with a sound like truth being whittled. You remember how to trap a line across a trail? Silas asked. Jonah grinned. Do I look senile to you? Depends on the light. They worked until the moon rose. Wire traps strung between trees, caltrops scattered at narrow bends, blind spots reinforced with cover. Jonah was methodical. Silas was surgical. By the time they returned, their hands were scraped raw and their shirts soaked with sweat, but the land itself seemed to bristle like a dog baring its teeth. Later, with the fire burning low and Maggie asleep in the loft above, Jonah poured 2 glasses of rye and handed one to Silas. She believes you're her father, Jonah said. I never said I was. You didn't say you weren't. Silas stared into the glass. You think I should correct her? I think you should ask yourself why you haven't. Jonah leaned back, the glow of firelight catching the scars that ran across his knuckles like faded warnings. Men like us, we don't get many chances to rewrite the story. I'm not trying to be a father. Then stop acting like one. Silas took a sip and let the burn linger. What if I mess it up? You will, Jonah said. But maybe that's the point. She's not looking for perfect. Just someone who won't disappear when the smoke clears. There was a silence between them, heavy but not unkind. Then in the quiet, a sound, a snapping branch, quick and sharp. Both men froze. Silas set his glass down slowly and reached for the rifle. Jonah drew the pistol from his belt, barrel glinting. Another sound. This time from the north edge of the property. Silas gestured and they moved, soft-footed, practiced. Years ago, they'd worked together in a place that wasn't called Bitter Hollow yet. Then it had just been a nameless ridge where bad men made worse decisions. They split at the clearing. Silas took the left flank, moving through brush with ghost-like care. He found the trail trap, intact. But the wire had been nudged, the slightest disturbance. A boot print, not fresh but newer than the rain 2 days back. Someone had scouted the place. He returned an hour later, Jonah behind him. "They're close," Silas said. "They didn't spring anything," Jonah replied. "Means they know you. Means they want to bleed us slow." The next morning, Maggie helped Jonah hang tin cans from trees, early warning bells. She did it with surprising precision, tying knots without being shown twice. "You done this before?" Jonah asked. "No," she said. "But I watch everything." "Smart girl." She shrugged. "Mama said survival ain't about being strong. It's about noticing the cracks before they spread." Jonah grunted approval. "Your mama sounds like a hard woman." "She was soft," Maggie said, eyes far away. "That's why the world crushed her." Silas watched from the porch, heart a strange mixture of pride and ache. By evening, a fog rolled in thick and low, wrapping the valley in a silver hush. They ate in silence. Even Maggie didn't talk, her eyes darting to the window every time a branch creaked. The tension pressed on them like a second skin. When the fire died to coals, Silas rose, checked his rifle one more time, then climbed into the loft and knelt beside Maggie's cot. She opened her eyes as if she'd been waiting. "You sleepin' in here tonight?" she whispered. "No." "Because of them?" "Because I need to be where I can see everything." She reached out, touched the sleeve of his shirt. "Don't let them take you." He swallowed, then nodded once. "I won't." Downstairs, Jonah was already settling into the rocking chair, shotgun across his lap. Silas took the chair by the front window. The stars were gone behind fog. The wind shifted, and with it came a scent, saddle leather, gunpowder, and something colder, anticipation. He leaned back and closed his eyes for just a moment. And in that moment he saw it, Bitter Hollow, a field of ash and ruin. A woman with a child in her arms, whispering his name like it was a plea and a curse. He turned away from her then, back in that memory, thinking it was mercy. But now he saw the weight she carried and the shape it left behind. He opened his eyes. Tomorrow the reckoning would come. And this time he wouldn't run. The fog didn't lift with the morning. It only thickened, clinging to the trees like something alive, muting every sound, swallowing every shadow. Jonah sipped his coffee on the porch, his shotgun across his knees, his eyes scanning the perimeter with the fixed, measured calm of a man who's waited for too many dawns like this. Silas stood at the tree-lean, rifle over his shoulder, motionless as the earth beneath him. They knew what was coming. Men like them could sense it in their bones. Pressure rising, silence sharpening, the way animals went still before a storm. Maggie stayed inside the cabin. She sat at the window, clutching her doll tight, eyes wide, watching the mist like it might part to reveal something out of a nightmare. "How many do you think?" Jonah finally asked. "More than we can handle." "Less than an army." Jonah grunted. "That's usually the worst number." The first sound came at noon. A low whistle, almost melodic, drifting through the fog like a funeral song. Silas straightened. His hands tightened on the rifle, and he nodded to Jonah, who rose without a word and disappeared behind the shed to take up position. Silas moved back to the porch. Maggie stood behind the door. "Get under the stairs. Don't come out unless it's me." She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, then closed it. She vanished into the shadows without a sound. Silas waited. Then came the voice. Quote, and unmistakable. "Creed." The fog thinned enough to reveal 3 men stepping out from the trees, ragged dusters, wide hats, rifles slung easy like they were born holding them. Behind them, a 4th figure emerged. The man in black. Silas stepped off the porch. "You're a long way from Bitter Hollow." "I never really left," the man in black replied. "I just waited until the wind brought you back. You made your point there. Burned enough to satisfy whatever debt you think I owed." The man in black smiled, but there was no humor in it. "There was a woman," he said. "She pleaded for you. Said you weren't the man you once were. I didn't believe her. Now I see she was right. You're something different now. Soft, slower, and dragging ghosts around on your saddle." Silas didn't flinch. "You came all this way to lecture me?" "I came for the girl. She's not yours to take." The man in black raised a brow. "She's not yours either." Silas shifted his weight. Maybe not by blood, but by choice. There was a pause. Then the man in black gave a little nod to one of his men. The gunman stepped forward, quick and silent. But the second his boot hit the hidden wire, the trap snapped. A branch swung down hard, slamming into his chest and knocking him flat. The others flinched, reaching for weapons, but Jonah fired from behind the shed, his shot ripping through the thigh of the second man. Chaos exploded. Silas dropped behind the porch railing and fired. His bullet clipped the third man's shoulder, sending him spinning. The man in black ducked low, rolled behind a stump, and returned fire. Bullets splintered wood, punched into dirt, echoed off trees. Inside, Maggie covered her ears and pressed her face against the cold stone foundation, whispering over and over, "Don't die, don't die, don't die." Outside, Jonah moved like a wolf through the fog, reloading on instinct. He fired again, missed. The third man had found cover and was circling toward the cabin. Silas saw him and cut him off, aiming low. The shot hit the gunman in the knee, dropping him instantly. Then came silence. For a second, everything froze, except for the sharp breathing and the quiet ticking of Jonah's pocket watch, cracked but still working. The man in black rose from behind the stump, coat torn, eyes calm. "3 down," he said. "But you're still bleeding, Creed. You just don't know where yet." He raised his pistol. Silas dove aside, landing hard on his ribs as the shot ripped through the air. It missed by inches. Jonah took aim, but the man in black anticipated, spun, and fired. The shot hit Jonah in the side, sending him sprawling into the ferns. "Jonah!" Silas shouted. "No time." Jonah grunted. "Finish it." Silas turned just in time to see the man in black charging him. They collided in the dirt, fists, knees, and elbows all thrown with brutal force. Silas took a hit to the jaw that split his lip. He returned one that cracked the other man's nose. They rolled, wrestled, hands clawing for weapons. The man in black got his fingers around a knife. Silas barely blocked the strike, feeling the blade slice across his forearm. He grunted, head-butted the man, then shoved him off. Both men staggered up. "I should have killed you the first time," the man in black spat. "You tried," Silas growled. "You just missed." They charged again. This time, Silas let him get close, then shifted aside and slammed his rifle stock into the man's back. As he stumbled, Silas grabbed him by the coat and flung him against a tree. The man collapsed to his knees. Silas aimed. "You've been chasing me for 10 years. You burned down Bitter Hollow. You put a hole in everything I tried to forget. You left us to die," the man rasped. "You ran when we needed you." Silas hesitated. Then Maggie's voice rang out, clear, small, shaking. "Don't do it." He turned. She stood by the cabin steps, barefoot in the cold, eyes shining with fear and something deeper, hope. "He's not worth it," she whispered. "You're not like him." Silas looked at her. Then back at the man on his knees. Slowly he lowered the rifle. But the man in black wasn't done. He lunged, knife flashing. This time Maggie screamed. And Jonah, bloodied, limping, fired one last shot. It hit center mass. The man in black dropped. Silas exhaled, a slow, bitter wind leaving his chest. He crossed the clearing, kicked the knife away, then knelt by Jonah. "You all right?" Jonah winced. "Still breathing. Which is becoming less and less fun. We'll get you patched." "Sure," Jonah grunted. "Just don't ask me to dance for a while." Later, when the smoke cleared and the sun finally pierced the fog, Silas stood on the porch again. Maggie was beside him, the doll still in her hands but forgotten for now. They both looked out over the land, scorched, cracked, and quiet. Jonah lay inside on a cot, patched and grumbling, sipping whiskey like it was medicine. Maggie tugged Silas's coat sleeve. "You could have killed him." "I know. But you didn't." He looked down at her. "I'm tired of letting anger decide who I am." She nodded slowly. Then said, "I want to stay here. With you." He paused. The wind moved through the trees again. For the first time in a long while, it didn't sound like a warning. "I think I'd like that," he said. The land would heal. The scars would remain. But somewhere in that broken place something new had taken root. And as the sun dropped behind the ridge, Silas Creed wrapped his arm around the girl who called him Papa. Not because she had to, but because she believed it. And that was enough to make a man change. Enough to make him stay.